Welcome back, everyone. Hope your summer's been a good one. Today we're going to hear from Michael Garjian about an important contemporary technological issue, and this is the matter of the interface between the economics of the introduction of any new technology into the marketplace and the societal impact of that technology. Uh, there are there are risks associated with the introduction of any new technology into the marketplace. Some are technical, which we've been able to manage very effectively. Some are economic, which are focused on the concerns of investors and shareholders, and some are social. I think we've done a very poor job as technologists of dealing with the social impact of much of the technology that has been introduced recently, especially related to social media and the internet and the web and now artificial intelligence. And I think that should be a great concern to all of us. I'll give you one classic example of that, and that's Meta's decision earlier this year to abandon third-party fact checkers from their Facebook and Instagram platforms. This has served the purpose of allowing some of the planet's most formidable liars and miscreants to provide misinformation and disinformation to serve their interests and perhaps their agendas, all the while making a profit for Meta. That's really not a constructive use of technology, in my view. Now, Michael is not an economist. He's an entrepreneur, an innovator, and the founder of Carbon Star, which he has talked about on other occasions. Michael also has a deep concern in the societal impact and risks of new technology. And I find that he has some intriguing thoughts about how this contemporary interface between economics and new technology might be reformed in order to serve societal interest more effectively. So, Michael, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. I would ask everyone to mute their microphones while Michael is presenting. And Michael, the floor is yours. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Hope you had a great summer. You can see my screen now, yes?
Yep.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about an alternative to corporate capitalism in managing the socioeconomic risks of emerging technology. Now, we can't just talk about one particular technology. I think we have to look at the broad picture, the big picture. So we need to look at the entire economic system because it has much to do with what's happening with technology today. This is going to have to be very quick, well, as quick as I can make it, because I'm going to try to compress 25 years into about 50 minutes. So let's move on to economic sustainability. Over the years here at Wilson Science and Technology, we've been talking about numerous technologies. Concerns are arising, not just about AI, but there are still new and yet undiscovered technologies coming. Nanotechnology, medical technologies, surveillance technologies, neuro, brainwave readers, robotics, and who knows what else is coming down the pike over the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years. Both positive and they have both positive and negative aspects. We have to ask who will control how these are used. How will these impact society in general? So today I'd like to address that issue not by pointing out problems, but to provide a detailed roadmap of exactly how to solve those problems. To do this properly, we cannot focus on specific technologies. We must take a broader approach. So I'm going to ask you to observe the situation from well above sidewalk level. I'm going to ask you to observe from 50,000 miles high. We need to think about how we want our planet to be 100, 250, 500 years from now. The days of thinking from quarter to quarter are over. It's extremely myopic. We must think about very long-term sustainability. So let's first talk about technology in general. Technology drives the direction of society. Whoever controls capital controls technologies to a great degree, thus controls the direction of society. Financial elites control capital, thus the direction of society and particularly opportunities. They decide who gets funded. The financial sector itself is driven by the unrestrained desire for profits and growth. Now, the onset of AI, coming AGI, and then AI, ASI, and other technologies demands action to ensure benefits to people on the planet. So we must go beyond just technologies. We must also consider how we can create a just, equitable, sustainable society on a long-term basis. We are at a very important point in the path of our human journey. We are at a fork in the road. And this was kind of reaffirmed when I asked a friend of mine who teaches sociology at a Ivy League school here out in Western Mass, what are the kids thinking about nowadays? His response was, they are wondering if we are heading towards dystopia or utopia. That shocked me. So what's dystopia? What might dystopia look like? Well, that's where our planet could become controlled by large corporations bent on maximizing profit and growth for their investors, regardless of the impact on the planet or the people who inhabit it. It could also see a growing concentration of wealth and power into few hands, control of the many by the few. It could be increased observation of the public. We've got micro cameras, license plate readers, and all kinds of technology. And eventually, in the nano world, we'll have virtually invisible particles of dust that are fitted with audio and video sensors. This can come down the road. Another aspect of a dystopian society would be loss of democracy and catastrophic impacts from climate change. On the other hand, what might a utopian society look like? Well, that could be a planet controlled by communities not committed to maximizing profit and growth, but committed to creating a happy, sustainable life for all people, where all people have access to food, clothing, shelter, education, opportunities to improve their lives, where technologies are developed with the goal of benefiting society, not just to make some money, where people are more valued than profits and communities are as powerful as corporations, if not more powerful. And the end of hunger and poverty and homelessness and hopelessness, and improving climate, strong democracy, where small businesses flourish. These might be some of the aspects of a utopian society. Now, due to sociological impacts from powerful political, technological, and economic forces, we're experiencing increasing inequities of wealth, increasing stress and ill health, persistent hunger and poverty, increasing homelessness and hopelessness, particularly among the young, where the suicide rate among young girls between 18 and 24 is exploding. Increased control by the few over the many, oligarchy, growing observation of people, and loss of privacy. The onset of AI, AGI, ASI, and other coming technologies demands action to ensure benefits to society. So where are we on our path of the journey of our human journey here? Are we heading toward dystopia or utopia? What would our grandchildren and their children want us to do at this point while something can still be done? Will they be the beneficiaries of our actions, or will they be the victim of our inaction? Will we sit back paralyzed by the belief that we're powerless, or will we use our collective intelligence and wisdom and strength to act, knowing that the world we want for them and us is still ours, for the taking, for the taking. If we want it, it's ours. I'm going to refer you to the words of Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So we're going to be talking about this, but as Ron said, I don't have an economics degree, so who do I think I am talking about alternative economics? Well, I'm getting my information from my life experiences, which I'm going to talk about as briefly as I possibly can. In a former life spanning more than 50 years, I was a commercial entrepreneur who developed products and technologies and sold them around the world. During that time, I employed almost 450 people, was granted 10 worldwide patents, established 5 manufacturing facilities in the US and 1 in South Australia, sold millions of dollars of products, and entered a corporate joint venture with a company which in 1992 was the largest company in the world. One of my businesses was a Neon Technology Corporation. And Neon Technology Corporation was formed for the purpose of producing a flat light source that could last 100 years. But there was no market. This was back in 1980. There was no market for a flat light source, even if it could last 100 years. So I had to pivot, and I converted my technology into signage. The way I was developing light was engraving channels in plates of glass, fusing those plates together, infusing plasma streams, it could be neon, argon, xenon, or whatever gas I wanted, into those channels to produce light. When that didn't turn out to be marketable, I pivoted and began to produce engraved images within the plates of glass to create a new type of neon sign. This is what neon signs looked like before my invention. Tubes of glass, you've seen them, filled with neon plasmas that glow. And this is what neon signs look like using my technology. These are a number of signs that I produced over the years. I was invited to form a joint venture by what was in 92 the largest company in the world, and we produced thousands of neon signs. However, in 99, that Tokyo company fell on hard times, and we had to abandon the joint venture that we'd done. And they went from, I think, the largest company in the world to about 130 in a short period of time. So I had to close the company. I tried to raise money elsewhere, but back in those days, this was now we're up to 98, 99. And in trying to find new investors, much of the investment world was investing in .coms. The response I got was, what, you manufacture something to make money? What are you, crazy? We just count clicks to make money. Well, we all know what happened to those folks. So I did have to shut down.
That's where I want to go. Yeah.
I got all of my people jobs elsewhere in a company that a friend of mine formed. And in
right now.
we have a,
Good morning.
as I walk down the hall from Neon Technology at 1 p.m. on August 30th, 1999, after 30.
Hi, it's Lisa around.
She is. She got a couple of them already. So what's your last name?
Gillett, Gillett.
After 13 years of building that company,
Okay.
I made one request. Walking down the hall, I said, God, I never want to invent another object again. I'd like an idea. No weight, no freight, no factories, just something that can fly around.
Michael, you have been muted. Michael, you're muted.
So, okay, I can do that up here. We had to close the company because the joint venture partner could not continue. So as I walked down the hall from Neon Technology after getting all of my employees jobs at another company, no one got laid off. It was on 1 p.m. August 30th of 99. After 30 years of working at this, I had to close it, and I made one request. I said, God, I never want to invent another object. I'd like an idea, no weight, no freight, no factories, just something that can fly around the world and do good effortlessly. And in response, over the next 4 months, I began to develop intuitions or I'd call them maybe fragments of philosophical information, but it was coming to me. I wasn't even sure what this was. I just knew it was part of something, and I was eventually able to articulate it. And what I received when I was able to articulate it, much to my surprise, was a vision for an alternative economic system where all people can have access to food and shelter and medical care, education, opportunities to improve themselves, and also to become rich. Because I put the pen to the paper at 11 a.m. on January 1st of 2000, the first day of the new millennium, I gave the model, the designation E2M, an economic model for Millennium 2000. I then went on and took a job at the Valley Community Development Corporation, where my job was to help low to very low income people start businesses. We started 70 over there. These are some of the newspaper articles about the businesses or about my office. And here's some pictures of the businesses that we started. Here's an article from Business West, our major business journal out here, asking, why is East Hampton doing so well at this time when other communities are in trouble? And this was the answer that came after a survey. I was third on the list of the catalysts for revitalization in East Hampton after the adoption of a mayoral council form of government and the municipal success in getting grants, which a good amount, $120,000 worth, I got. I then worked with the Alliance to develop power, 1,450 families representing 8,000 individuals that lived in four large apartment complexes around the valley here. They represented $40 million in assets, $6 million in cash flow. And my job was to help them understand how they could use their economic power to achieve their social ends. And I also helped develop United Landscaping, a worker-owned landscaping and painting corporation that then began to maintain these apartments with employees who lived in the apartments. This is a group of us. I took this picture as we were riding up the freight elevator in the Senate office building to Senator Kerry and Senator Kennedy's people. And when we walked into the Senate office building, the elevator operator said, I'm sorry, there's not enough room in one elevator for you. We're going to split you among 3 elevators. And the folks said, well, look, we came in together. We're going to stick together. Thank you for the elevator, but we're going to take the stairs. Thank you. The elevator operator took mercy and walked us around to the freight elevator. So that's why we're all packed into the Senate office building freight elevator, so they could rise up together. I also worked with the Century of Care Alliance, helping refugees and new Americans start small businesses. This is Guckel and Mina. They opened a supermarket in Springfield after arriving in America from a refugee camp in Bhutan. During this time, I also developed the Carbon Star system. It sits here on an 8 foot by 40 foot mobile platform. It will take any form of biomass and convert it into biochar, liquid biofuel, solid biofuel, gaseous biofuel, and fertilizers. And it will convert this biomass anywhere on the planet. So wherever there is biomass in the form of either waste streams or plant matter, we can now produce energy, electricity, biochar to clean the water, and other materials. I entered that system into the Elon Musk funded $100 million X Prize for carbon removal systems. And I was ranked as number 80 out of 1,400 global entrants and teams competing for that. And I was within the top 28 of land-based systems. Here's an article in my local newspaper talking about that. And here's another article, both cover stories in the major business journal talking about that. So enough of me. But while I was in those factories and those facilities of mine, I really never had a chance to look out the window and understand what was going on. I had my hands full in my own facility, and I had windows in my office. But once I left that environment, I had a chance to really think about things and look at the world. And I kind of realized that things really weren't great. And as Bertrand Russell said, it's a healthy thing now and then to hang a question mark on the things that you have long taken for granted. So I am here with my bag of question marks for you two. And so we're going to talk about how we might improve the situation and eliminate some of the problems of our planet, such as poverty, hunger, homelessness, hopelessness, violence in the family, resource depletion, pollution, climate change. These are all the results, I realized, to a great degree, of one root cause. And I also realized that it is easier to fix the root cause than any one of the hundreds, if not thousands, of problems that it causes. And by focusing on the root cause, E2M, the alternative economic system I envisioned, provided unprecedented opportunities for individuals and communities to create significant change through simple actions. And basically, what E2M says is we want to maximize impact with minimum of impact input. We want to ask as little of the public as we can. And I came to the belief that the root cause for many of these problems is that the goal for investment in our current system is to attain maximum profits and maximum growth for the benefit of relatively few stockholders. And maximum profits and maximum growth aren't enough. If we do well this year, investors want us to do better next year and the year after and the year after. And this goal is also the legal requirement and purpose of the corporation. And if it can be shown that a corporation is not working to maximize profit and growth, that corporation can be sued. Just the same way eBay sued Craig Newmark after they made an investment in his company and he decided he wanted to be more philanthropical. And the court said, no way. The corporation is strictly and solely there for the purpose of maximizing profit and growth for its stockholders. So how does this quest for maximum profit and growth impact society? How does this root its way throughout our entire society? Well, let's look at how corporations can achieve maximum profits and growth. One way is they can keep prices as high as possible. That's called what the market will bear, and costs as low as possible. Well, lower costs often mean lower quality raw materials, lower wages, no benefits, outsourcing, and layoffs when profits are down. Another way is by purchasing another corporation, buying just its assets, moving them to the new company's own facility, laying off the employees. That is one of the fastest ways to book profits and growth. The company can also create new products. Well, if they create more products, they have to sell more products. But what if there's no need for more products? Well, we'll create more needs. Well, how do we create needs? You create needs that requires more commercials and more advertising and sticking kids in front of the television when they're 2 years old. And you and I sit in front of that TV, and 25% of the time, they're trying to sell you something. When we create more needs and create more products, sales are up. Yay, that's great, right? Well, that requires more resources. And if we use them up here or use them up there, we'll just get more here and over there. But unfortunately, the planet is finite, round, and there is only one. Less resources remaining results in higher resource extraction costs and resource depletion. Resource depletion could mean resource wars. Let's hope we don't get ourselves into one of those again. This all requires more energy. It produces more waste, more pollution, and more CO2 outputs into the atmosphere. And as this whole process goes on, it results in more wealth for elites and investors and more debt for consumers. The larger and lean and mean get larger, leaner, and even meaner. The rich get richer. The middle class erodes and joins the poor. The poor become homeless, and children go to bed hungry, like 20% of the children in America do every night. Wealth concentrates. Wow, why is this quest for maximum profits and growth unsustainable? Because it requires continually increasing purchases from consumers to achieve growth. It results in rampant consumerization, excess resource consumption, pollution, and waste. It creates inequities in the access to food, medical care, education, and opportunities, and it drives consumers with unprecedented amounts of debt into increasing levels of debt. And wealth concentrates. Now, let's look at the concentration of wealth in America. Now, to be honest with you, which I always am anyway, but I wrote this presentation in 2006. I modified it a bit. And the fact that I can make this presentation to you today, and it's even more relevant than it was then, shows that these problems aren't improving, they're getting worse. So the concentration of wealth in America in 2001, 1% of the population owned almost half of all of the private property. Less than 9% of the population owned 92% of the property. The other 8% was split by the other 99% of the people. We got the crumbs. In 2001, 1% of the US population owned 50% of all the liquid investable capital in America. Those are the folks who drive the direction of society. In 2001, it was said, well, more people own stocks and bonds than ever in the United States. Well, if you look at the numbers, here they are. In 2001, for every 10,000 people in the US population, 20 made more in stocks and bonds than the other 9,980 combined. And we know who those few percent, those 20 people are. The New York Times reports the richest 1% in the United States owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. But that was in 2014. Right now, 88 families own more wealth than 90% of the global population. Let's listen to the words of Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. We can have a democratic society, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. We cannot have both. So let's look at economic expansion and growth. Oh boy, this is good. Everybody wants to expand the economy. Well, not everybody, but let's look at how the quest for max profit and growth relates to debt. Consumer sales account for 72% of the GDP. 72%. As consumers increase their purchases, corporate profits and growth increase, and the US GDP increases. If the GDP is increasing, the economy is considered healthy. If it decreases, it is considered to be unhealthy and in regression or depression. So let's look at this chart. Bill Clinton told us that between 1980 and 2001, the GDP expanded faster than in any other time in history. So is this a chart of economic growth, expansion, and growth? Well, it could be, it looks that way, but it isn't. It's a chart of US household debt in trillions of dollars. During the 25 years from 1955 to 1980, debt rose about $1 trillion, or about $40 billion a year. From 1980 to 2001, that period that Bill was talking about, total household debt rose from just over 1 trillion to over 7 trillion, an increase of 6 trillion in 21 years, are about $300 billion a year. It was previously 40. Now let's look from 2001, 2005. Debt rose over 7 trillion from 2001 to over 11 trillion 4 years later. That's $1 trillion a year of growth in debt. Why is this happening? Because between 55 and the 70s and early in 70s, people usually bought with cash, but they ran out of cash because people who once paid for goods and cash were not earning enough to pay cash for what they thought they needed. So our bankers created credit cards to keep consumption as high as possible and the GDP healthy, while consumers mortgaged their future. Bankers at credit card companies who were borrowing money from the Fed at 2 to 3% interest rates and lending it out at 24 to 33% interest rates were ecstatic, while the rest of the population was drowning in debt. Let's look further. Today, the total debt, in 2016, the total debt was $18 trillion. And this is what's been happening since 2005. Today, total debt is at a record $19.2 trillion. So as time goes on, people are purchasing more and more with credit, with debt, by working harder, longer, and more productively for not much more in real income, while free time, good health, time with loved ones, public mental and physical health declines. For the vast majority of us, we are stuck on a treadmill of ever increasing speed, just trying to stay afloat. Thus, we're stuck here in an economic system which must continuously and increasingly indebt the population to be considered healthy. As Mohandas K. Gandhi said, there is more to life than increasing its speed. So how do we throttle back this consumption-based reality that demands maximum profit and maximum growth for the few while moving at an ever-increasing pace to unsustainability or even self-destruction? What's the solution to our dilemma here? Is it to dismantle the system? Should we try to dismantle the system? That's not likely. On May 1st, 1971, 50,000 young people descended on Washington, D.C. after years of unsuccessful anti-war protests. Their stated intent was to shut down the city. Here's the front page of the Washington Post. The encamped protesters, with an upside-down American flag in the foreground and the setting sun in the background, listened to a concert. That was on Saturday night. The siege of Washington began on Sunday, May 2nd to Tuesday, May 4th. The Key Bridge and many streets of Washington were lined shoulder to shoulder by National Guard troops. The air was filled with tear gas. Thousands of young people blocked traffic and created havoc at pre-designated targets. The city was in chaos. Here we see a picture of troops with fixed bayonets being deployed from a Huey helicopter, the same ones used in Vietnam, landing on the Washington Memorial grounds. The caption reads, in all, 180 soldiers were landed there. Few demonstrators were in the vicinity of the monument at the time, and no confrontation took place. I happened to be there and watched this helicopter land. I was shocked, and I can tell you there's nothing that'll wake you up in the morning faster than a whiff of tear gas. 3,000 people were arrested on May 2nd, 7,000 on May 3rd, 2,000 more on May 4th. It was the largest number of U.S. citizens arrested by the government in U.S. history. So, folks, dismantling the system is not likely, and we don't want to dismantle it anyway. Well, perhaps the troops, and it's less of a chance today. The troops are more well-trained. and armed with deadly force. Military equipment is much more sophisticated, and there are many more jail cells available, thus avoiding the need to confine thousands of people in outdoor fenced-in camps, as was done in 1971. So, well, maybe our public elected officials could pass some type of legislation to change the laws to try to deal with this situation. Well, we know that is unlikely. It already would have happened. All those politicians going to Washington to fight for us are too busy fighting with each other to get anything meaningful done for us. They are controlled by special interests and foreign agents who could care less about the US population or what we think. Fortunately, politicians are not necessary to provide a solution to solve the problem because it requires a socio-economic solution, not a political solution. What we really need to do to avoid the problem of max profit and max growth is we need to find a new investor who will accept a new goal for investment. And that goal is to achieve adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all. Now, this is a goal based on caring, sharing, and even love, rather than the insidious greed-based goal of individual and corporate self-enrichment at the expense of others. So let's talk about this new investor. To be effective, we need these new investors to always be there with no chance to change their minds. We need them to have perpetual funds as long as there is commerce. We need them to provide billions of dollars as well. We need to weave this goal into the fabric of society, unable to be attacked, altered, or removed as the geopolitical landscape continuously changes. So who is such an investor? Philanthropists? Yes, on an individual basis, but there are not enough of them. The government? No, or it would have happened a long time ago. Any suggestions? Fortunately, this one investor has trillions of dollars, and in its most selfish moments, this potential investor demands that the criteria of adequate profit, sustainable growth for the good of all be met, or this investor could die. So who's this investor with trillions of dollars who will die if we don't create a sustainable society? Who is it? It's the community itself. That investor is the community. We know that the current economic system does not serve the community adequately. We need to create an alternative, voluntary, parallel economic system that enables the community as an entity to use the free market and the tool of capitalism to create as much wealth as it needs to provide for its own health. We want the community to take care of itself, regardless of what politicians and elites are doing. We need to take care of ourselves. We're capable of doing that. We need an economic system to serve the millions of us who are dissatisfied with the current system of corporate capitalism and who are hoping for a new reality and a hopeful future, especially the young. Such a system must use the same rules, laws, and techniques upon which our current economic system depends for its own survival. It must be compatible with the current system, using the best that the current system has to offer while rejecting its greed-based goals. Fortunately, such a system is now available. It's designated by the term E2M. So just as an unhealthy mother can give birth to a healthy baby, we could plant a seed in the womb of corporate capitalism to give birth to a new economic reality based on caring, sharing, compassion, sustainability, and yeah, even love. So how powerful can the community become by using the E2M economic model and system? Well, let's look at some numbers here. The gross domestic product of the United States, which is equal to the total value of US goods and services produced each year, is now $29 trillion. Of that amount, about 72% or 21 trillion is generated by the purchases of goods and services by individuals. This amount could sustain 21 million businesses, each earning $1 million a year. Currently, many of those purchase dollars support businesses and corporations whose primary goal is to produce maximum profit and growth for relatively few owners or stockholders. If even a fraction of 21 million businesses join the E2M economic system, they would create enormous amounts of community wealth that could make a huge difference in our society. If we could harness that purchasing power and direct it, it becomes a powerful force for good. So just as a laser aligns normally weak and unaligned rays of light into beams powerful enough to vaporize metal, we can use E2M to coordinate economic transactions into streams of financial energy powerful enough to create the world we want. It's there for the taking. No need for new legislation. No need for government assistance or approval of the elites. It's ours if we want it. It's ours for the taking, and I'm going to show you how to get it. There is a growing consensus among people of all backgrounds that current strategies for solving our socio-economic and environmental problems aren't working. And despite the best interests of many committed organizations and individuals, these problems persist and in many cases are worsening. Demands for truly innovative solutions and measurable results are growing louder. So I refer you to the words of one of the richest men in the world, Bill Gates. At 2008 World Economic Forum, Gates stated, "We need a new form of creative capitalism that balances the needs of the market with the needs of those the market leaves behind." It was true in 2008, and it's even more true now. So if a community could hold wealth, it could do some amazing things. What can a wealthy community do with its wealth? Well, it could build affordable housing with stable rents or very low interest long-term mortgages. In inner cities, it could hire and train residents to rehab properties and provide them with mortgages. Now, why would you want to pay $1,200 for a mortgage for a $200,000 house when you can have that house for $400 a month? That's less than the government pays for Section 8 rentals. The business could purchase commercial realty and provide stable rents to small businesses for decades. Well, in my town, I got a grant for a blight grant to improve the blighted area. We had a 50% vacancy rate. When I rented my office, I rented it for $5 a square foot. 30 months later, we had filled those empty spaces with new businesses, and the rent went up to $11. And in Northampton, the rent went from $3 a square foot to $50 a square foot for first floor space, because businesses, as they succeeded, resulted in rent increases by landlords. And eventually these businesses got thrown out because they couldn't afford it. As a friendly venture capital investor, the community could fund new, small, and large businesses owned by the community in partnership with entrepreneurs and employees to produce very high quality products, also free from planned obsolescence. The community would refrain from lobbying, and it would refrain from insidious political interference. It could partner with public research universities to develop technologies to achieve maximum solutions rather than maximum profits. So rather than having a company fund the research to produce something that will maximize profits and growth, the community could fund research to benefit the community itself. This is one of the elements of how you control what happens with technology. Eventually, as technologies are controlled by communities, you can mitigate some of the damage that will be done as others are rushing into the fire for achieving max profits and growth before someone else gets there first. It could partner with and act collectively with other regional, national, and global E2M communities on major environmental, social, and economic initiatives. And these are just a few ways that the community with wealth could produce a sustainable, caring society. So how does a community create wealth? Well, you can't tax it. That's not viable. You can see that from the discourse that's happening anytime people talk about raising taxes nowadays. You can't take it from the rich. Some people would consider that not fair, and it will never happen. The best way for a community to create wealth is to earn it using the most powerful tool known for creating wealth in the history of capitalism, the tool in the history of humanity. That's the tool of capitalism in a free market. So what is E2M? E2M is an innovative economic solution that enables communities as entities to use the free market to create enormous, virtually unlimited amounts of wealth for themselves, just as individuals and corporations have been doing for centuries. So let's look at what an E2M community looks like first. It stands on three pillars. There's the Regional Economic Council. That's a group that represents the community and exists not to maximize profit and growth for investors, but to provide maximum goodwill and good health and a good future to the community. Its sole purpose is to support the community. And here we have the community, which is the people in general. And we also have the third pillar, which is E2M affiliated businesses. So in an economic system with numerous flows of capital, it is the businesses that are magnets for capital that create wealth. So the community needs to be involved with businesses. So how does this all fit together? How do these things relate to each other? Well, the Regional Economic Council and businesses relate in that the businesses provide profits and or equity to the REC as well as to its employees. The REC in return provides low interest loans and friendly venture investment capital for existing and startup businesses that are in the model. How does the Regional Council relate to the community itself? Well, the community members serve on the Regional Economic Council and its subcommittees. The Regional Economic Council funds social, economic, and environmental initiatives that benefit the community. And how does the community interact with the businesses? First of all, the employees of these businesses decide where half of their business's regional council donation is spent. They choose where that money is going to be spent. So they might choose that they want to spend that money to provide an operation for a young woman who needs a lung transplant. And when they're going to work and they're tired of kicking a punch press, and they say, I'm sick of this, they just need to look up and see the picture of that woman, that young girl, and they'll know that their work is more than just there to make money for the boss and for themselves. It's there and it's got a higher purpose. And people don't work for money. They want to know that their work is relevant. And so that is how you introduce soul into the corporation. And as the community members decide where their contribution is going, the community members, as the employees decide, the community members support E2M companies. And they can go to those companies through an E2M portal. And when the community members feel that a company is doing good, they're going to support it, just as they supported Ben and Jerry's and Newman's Own salad dressings and spaghetti sauces, and Stonyfield yogurt. The community will run to support a business that's supporting the community. So let's look at the regional council just a bit more. Of the money that it gets, 75% remains and invested locally within that regional economic cell. These are economic cells. There will be many of them around the country or the world. 75% of that money supports the local cell. 20% goes nationally to help support other E2M regions. In the event that, let's say, in a Rust Belt, they're not doing well, and some other places really doing well, some of those regional councils can help sustain the temporary setbacks of other cells. And 5% of that money goes international. Not that $50 to Egypt is going to make a big difference, but it's going to create lines of communication upon which new sales and new communication lines can develop, and upon which the model can grow. So let's look at the regional council. It's a board composed of 24 people. Now that can be variable, but let's assume 24 now. They each serve a 30-month rotating terms. The first 12 are selected by the E2M org, the International Chartering Organization, which charters these cells. Once 12 people are on, you add 4 every 5 months until we reach 24. Then we add 4 and ask the longer serving 4 to step down to create a rotating membership to avoid concentrations of power and influence within the board. They are elected to the board. They are elected by the board. The members of the board are elected by the board and represent a demographic cross-section of the local community. They're nominated by the community and elected by the board, but they can be removed by a democratic process if the community feels one of the board members is not doing what they should be doing. It would be composed of pastors, educators, bankers, investors, workers, organizers, entrepreneurs, elected officials, and others. It would be structured as a nonprofit foundation. This council would be responsible for determining the use of community funds, and it results in serving the common good under a collective thought process. When I was in the United Way, I was treasurer of my local United Way. We had 24 people. We had presidents of corporations who fought tooth and nail to maximize profit and growth when they weren't in our in our meetings. But when we got together, they fought tooth and nail to make sure that the money we collected as donations through the United Way was spent to help people. So when you're involved in that type of collective thinking, good things can happen. That's what we want to have, because collective thinking transcends individual greed. So how then, let's look at E2M affiliated businesses. How does a business become affiliated? Well, on the gold level, and this would be a few businesses, that is one that shares at least 5% of its profits and 5% of its business equity with the community through the regional council, and sets aside another 5% or more of profits and business equity to be shared with or purchased by its employees. On a less committed level, Silver Sponsor is a business that shares at least 5% of its profits or 0.5% of its sales with the community through the REC. Not a whole lot. A lot of companies already do that. On a bronze level, a supporting company is a business that shares with the community at least 5% of the profits or 0.5% of the sales from a particular product or service that the business offers. So why would a business do this? Well, it's because the company and its employees would become part of something with a higher purpose. People do not work just for pay. They want their work to be meaningful. E2M companies producing products for public consumption would be more attractive to the public and draw more sales. This has been borne out, as I said, by Ben & Jerry's and Newman's Own and others. The business could receive low to zero interest loans. It would have a dynamic workforce commitment, employee commitment that would operate more efficiently, and it would be more competitive. We had out here Stanhome Products years back, employed 1,200 people. They were a great company. People loved working there. The average term of service there was 22 years. 22 years. They had a waiting list 7,000 long for jobs. Parents passed jobs down to their children. But they went public. 5 years later, they were gone. The businesses could also have access to institutional resources from foundations and other places like that. They would work and trade with each other through the E2M portal and network. In other words, this Amazon-like portal, if you're a business in there, they're going to go to you first. And E2M companies would have competitive advantages dealing with public sector institutions. So, in fact, maybe if politicians wanted to help, they could provide tax breaks or benefits for companies that are in the system. And the third leg of the system is the community itself. And it is the community with its enormous purchasing power that can make any company successful. Thus, community members support E2M certified companies by purchasing from them through the portal. That's all we're asking for the community. We're not asking them for money. We're not asking them for the time, because they have neither of those. We're just asking them to do something that they already do in a slightly different way. Do not go down to a non-E2M company if you have an alternative E2M company you can buy from. So they would buy from these E2M companies through an e2mnet.com. It's not formed yet, and it might be a different name, but this will be the portal to the E2M economic model. As other highly decentralized regions develop their own E2M models, E2M regional councils, E2M companies and employees, institutions, and the general public would be linked through this portal. It will be a place where people, businesses, and organizations of like mind can work together, transact business together, support each other, and mature together. And just as many generations of immigrants collaborated with their own to rise within the new societies they adopted, so too will those entering the portal to the E2M economic system. Thus far, I've outlined the conceptual, structural, and operational aspects of the model. However, back when we were first talking about this, we went beyond that a bit to test the model. Congressman John Oliver he's no longer in Congress, a supporter since the first year. Other supporters were Senate President Stan Rosenberg. Stan asked me, as well as John asked me to, would you please put a representative on your E2M board? Which I did. Representative Ben Swan, a legendary civil rights leader, came on the board himself. We also had support, and some members of the board came on, but we had the support of a UMass chancellor, college president, economists, that was Julie, labor leaders, that's Jason, entrepreneurs, Steve, community members, Dave, and students, Mary, including the UMass SGA, representing 18,000 students. They supported and voted that the university look at E2M. Unfortunately, the university didn't look at E2M at that point in time because they had some issues with race relations, and that took first place. During that time, we produced products. This is biochar, first one ever sold on the internet. This is E2M community coffee. Put it out there in 2004. It's still out there. It sold tens of thousands of dollars worth of coffee. Dave owns 12, or he did, he sold them 12 pet stores. He dedicated this product line to E2M. Irene, my wife, and I said, well, let's do something too. So we produced Green Cat all natural pet litter. And we sold tens of thousands of dollars of that too. And then I shut it down because I wasn't interested in wasting my life selling cat litter so cats could have a better place to poop when there are better things to do. So goodbye, Green Cat. He was a nice cat. So as one of our board members said, Mary Jane, she was Stan Rosenberg's chief legislative aide. E2M is simply creating the means for something to happen, which wants to happen anyway. So from 2001 to 2008, we all got together, the board and the working committee, and we created all of the policies, procedures, methods necessary to create a template economic model that could be implemented anywhere where there are enough economic transactions to create community wealth. In 2008, the board said, okay, we've got a templatable model. All of the legalities are done. We got the 501c3. We can act as a fiscal agent for new cells. What do we want to do? Do we want to knock on businesses and tell them we've created a new economic system? Do they want to join? Or do we want to create an industrial base to serve the cell that can help it survive and grow and draw in other businesses? The board said, let's do the industrial base. And they said, Michael, you're the industrialist in the group. Why don't you go and do that? So I directed my efforts into creating and patenting a system for producing biochar, bio fertilizers, and energy from biomass while sequestering significant amounts of CO2. This can act as a microgrid, and this system could now enable the formation of intentional off-grid communities in rural and even remote areas. It gives complete independence to a group that wants to use that technology. Its completion now calls for renewal of the E2M initiative as envisioned by the E2M board in 2008. It is our hope that the E2M model will attract enough adherents to become an economic movement, providing the roadmap to the future that we all want. So could E2M and how grow? Well, how would it replicate itself regionally, nationally, and beyond? Well, we know there's a global appetite for change based on a number of happiness polls. The election of Barack Obama, forgot to check the spelling of his first name. The election of Barack Obama on a platform of change. The candidacy of Bernie Sanders attracted millions and millions and millions of young people. The explosive global support for the youngsters in Liberty Park during the Occupy Wall Street movement. People were getting off of their couches in London and going down to Piccadilly Square, waving their Occupy signs. And in Sydney and Tiananmen Square and Paris and London and other countries, cities around the world saying, you go kids, we're with you. What next? The kids were too young to know what to do, but they were debatably one of the most powerful spots on the planet in that park as Wall Street connivers looked from their windows sipping champagne, laughing at these kids. We could also create community union to use the E2M model. E2M is kind of hard to remember. It's a model, but we could create an organization that people can easily jump into. We could partner with community development corporations. There's 10,000 of them around the country. Their job is to build affordable housing and small businesses. Axion, another global organization, provides loans in third world countries so people can develop their own businesses. There are large charitable organizations that might be interested. I'd love to see if the United Way would be into it. They're not as relevant as they used to be when we all were kids. And the question was, what are you doing for the United Way? Now there's so many organizations that you can donate to through the internet that the United Way is looking to become more relevant. And we would also get money from existing foundations or donors. The women's movement and students is growing. They would be a potential driving force, as well as churches and universities. So I'd like to just close with a quote from Victor Hugo. There is one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come. Thank you. Here's some links if you're interested. And if you're interested, Ron said he'd love to see a movement start. If you're interested in spending 5 more minutes, we can
Yeah.
tell you how to create a movement.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I want to take some questions, but I want to make a couple of comments first. My experience is that most technologists prefer not to become involved in public policy or technology policy matters. They prefer to stay in the labs or in there doing that research. But I think we live in a time when that needs to change. I think we really need, as technologists, to preserve the public trust in technology, which I fear we're losing as a consequence of our information age and now with the uncontrolled activity related to artificial intelligence. I'm really concerned about the public trust. Now, Michael and I have been talking about the things he've addressed today for quite a while. And, I found him to be an unusual technologist. One of the things I read in something he'd written was when unelected people take office, we lose our democracy. Elon Musk. This was before Musk. I think that's pretty insightful. Musk and Stephen Miller are controlling the country in ways that are diabolical, in my judgment. And much of it is related to the introduction of technologies that affect our lives in many different ways. So, I know we're a science and technology forum, and typically we talk about, as we will next time, we'll talk about quantum computers. But I think we need to think about how technology, how the things we do impact society. And we have to start somewhere. So you may feel a little uncomfortable about hearing things that are policy related and maybe technology policy, public policy. But folks, I think we have to get involved. I really do. So, Michael, I thank you for that. I think you've added a new dimension to the Wilson Forum. I think it's an important dimension. I hope we'll have a lot more conversation about it. And frankly, I hope we can start some sort of movement because by God, this country needs to make some changes. So with that, let me take some questions. I see Vince Dixon. Do you have your hand up, Vincent, or maybe are you still there?
Yes, you're open.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Vincent.
Okay, good morning. As a historian, I've certainly tracked some of the problems that Michael references, and with the intersection with civics, the mechanisms of society. But there are, I think, 3 things that can be intersected with what has been said this morning. One is we do have a set of laws that go back to the early 1900s that are occasionally enforced more aggressively by the European Union, and that is antitrust. The tendency of any economic power to become or seek to become a monopoly can be effectively resisted by antitrust. Witness the $3.5 billion fine against Google by the European Union for rampant monopolistic practices and limitations on what Google will be regulated to do going forward. We haven't done anything of the sort here in recent years. There is an ethical or religious element here that actually ties into a second point we don't do enough of, and that's Socratic method, which is asking questions, whether it's true religion, where true religion welcomes the believer to ask questions, not stipulates all dogma, or whether it's simply asking questions as to how to take into account the great resources we've developed. So antitrust, ethical or religious, true religion, and Socratic method, I think we already have parts of what you're talking about, Michael, and that is some element there. The new Pope has referenced Rerum Novarum, the teaching of Pope Leo XIII on the condition of working men, and it's the grafting of Christian respectful values, saying that the working man must be compensated, the family must have a decent standard of living for there to be respect. So some immediate reactions from your historian, and in looking at the going forward of the various waves of industrial revolution we've talked about. Final point I saw in Forbes magazine, even talking about the next wave of crypto, that we're about to enter the second wave of crypto, which is, of course, a very sketchy economic, risque thing. But it's an example that even crypto, which people barely understand and may be sketchy, has evolved into a new wave as well. And this is part of what people need to recognize, is that from time to time, all trends, good, bad, and indifferent, do go through a new wave where excitement occurs and danger lurks.
Thanks, Vincent. Michael, you have a
And,
response in any way to that? Vincent's comment.
Thank you for that, Vincent. And we'll certainly go after Pope Leo too at some point in time. I think like
Okay, let's go on, Eddie.
well, then all bets are off.
Eddie?
Yes, I've got actually, I guess, two pieces here. One is you probably are aware of the Mondragon experiment in Spain, which actually seems very similar to what you proposed here and was extremely successful even under Franco. And that's a good example. The bad example is what happened to me. Because and I wish I'd heard your talk back in the 80s, because I attempted in Montreal to set up a set of cooperatives and to get people locally to think about starting businesses. That was through the Unitarian Church. And what caused that to fail was from within. There was one particular lady who got involved with Landmark, for example, and went bonkers. And she invited in people to give
look at that tree shading that.
to give a. Could someone please mute their mic? Thank you.
Thank you.
What happened there was that they brought in investors who turned out to be crooks. So I had to close the whole operation down, because otherwise people were going to be misled, and several people were. So there's also a lot of defense that needs to be done there. And so I like your talk simply because it provides structure and may provide walls against such failures.
I think co-ops conceptually are a great idea, particularly employee-owned co-ops. There are some issues when you try to grow a co-op. You can't go out after investment capital. Most of them don't do it because they're relying on their employees to put the money in. So there are certain limiting factors. And there used to be a great co-op movement years back, as I understand, in the US that fell apart. The plywood co-ops. But I think it's beginning to grow again, and co-ops can come into the model. That's, the model. It's only economic. It's not overarching. It's what you walk on. It is the floor. It is an economic. It is soil that co-ops and other types of similar businesses can flourish in. So we'd love to have co-ops come in too. But the way to really create wealth, and we don't have time to talk about it, but I love to talk about it, is to use the investment world to grow these E2M businesses. And when the community wants to control a business or owns a business, this is where communities fund a business as a startup. Now the community owns significant capital. Incredible things can begin to happen. Particularly on a gold level. Those are the ones that will come in on a gold level, community-owned businesses.
Okay, look, we have two more hands up and then we'll call it a morning. Marv, you're up.
Mark, you're muted.
Did Marv?
That I am, yes, which is most people would prefer that it stay that way, but I really appreciated your analysis from, essentially from the dollar up, and certainly your goals and intent. I'm very supportive of. I was flooded with thoughts as you were talking because there were a number of areas and implications that I think need to be focused on. But I think there's an underlying one which I think is a challenge to this whole idea. And that is money is presented as sort of the goal, accumulate money, whether that's from a founder's point of view or from an investor's point of view or government point of view. They want to be able to have large functioning companies that fuel whatever they want to fuel, including defense and other things. And money is definitely a significant element, but I see it as more of a scorecard with something. And the question is, what's the game that's actually being played to which money is a scorecard? And that game is and has been, I've been both as a psychologist, but more importantly as one of the earliest people in a number of different major startups or being very adjacent to them, including Apple and Microsoft and Lotus, and in a roundabout way, a lot of the internet companies. The general initial spark for a company is actually fairly positive on the part of the founders, usually. They're trying to accomplish something of value that they think will benefit society. Or they're just scientifically oriented and believe that if they do something in an area, society will find a way to benefit. And an example of that would be Jeffrey Hinton with neural nets. But others examples would be people I've worked with, like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mitch Kapor. But what I've found is, and I've also worked with a lot of venture firms, is that while that's the initial goal, and it's usually not where we end up. First of all, the real scorecard or the real goal that the scorecard simply represents is unfortunately power and a sense of winning. So that may not be inherent in the initial founders, but rather rapidly, the initial founders get taken over by their investors, by new people who come in to manage companies, and those people are opportunists. I would say that Lotus, we experienced that with Jim Manzi, where very bluntly, Mitch and I sat down at dinner once and said we didn't know people like him existed, but their metric is power, and their metric is winning. They come into it with, and this is true also the founders, with what I call the arrogance of vision. They know what's good for everybody. I've been in that position. I've made that mistake where you think you really understand this and where society needs to go. And that often is the spark of a company. But then the people who come in to run it, to run the machine, to get past the period of exploration, experimentation, and the introduction of something to a market, the professionals, they're driven by their control factors. And I think that that's primary, because just redistributing the money does not change the fact that there are people who are doing that. And the fact is, that's part of human nature. If we look at how kingdoms get structured, thousands of years ago, it was around power. And yes, accumulation through tithing or whatever else of money was a metric of it. So I think that in order for something like this to be successful, you got to look to what the core is. And I think the core is really what the motivations are of the people who are able to accumulate enough control of the levers. Now, there's also been, and I'll stop after this one, there's been this belief that a rising tide lifts all boats, especially in companies. People give up their personal security, their lives, to become part of startups. I know I've done it 30 times. And they do that based on both a combination of vision, but also being a participant as a winner. And in fact, that model is very actively being broken right now. If you're familiar with the concept now of acqui-hires, it used to be a company, you built it and it got acquired and everybody knew what percentage of the company they owned and they were able to say, hey, I did well. If you're not familiar with acqui-hires, it sort of started about a year and a half ago. It was a way of getting around the DOJ, but it was, instead of acquiring a company, you acquired people. And you basically left the rest of the company fallow. And that started with Microsoft when they acquired, who's now their CEO of AI, and that's Mustafa Suleyman, who started Inflection. He was also a founder of DeepMind, acquired by Google, and one of the major players, obviously. When he was acquired, he and a few of his other people were acquired for quite a lot of money, and the rest of the employees got nothing. The epitome of that was literally weeks ago when a company called Scale, which you may or may not be familiar with, but a major player, because what Scale did was, or do, they provide the data on which systems are trained, AI systems are trained for the pre-training. And the founder of it, a 28-year-old named Andrew Wang, and they're the major player. They supply everybody. He and a few other people got acquired for $14 billion. And the rest of the employees got nothing. So not only do you have an initial goal of control and power or insertion of your vision into the world that turns into power, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. What you end up with is even the people who they convince to join them to do it, when success is reached, aren't participants in it. So my point is, there's a fundamental reality here of how the capital gets generated, it's not where it gets distributed, but, and usually it comes from a positive point of view. Crypto, I should say, really came out of a positive point of view. Disintermediate the large systems that were trying to siphon off and control us and provide more individual and local control of funding mechanisms in exchange of money. Well, now the US government is going to form its own crypto, and our president has his own crypto. It's much more around power now than it was its original intent. And I think that's one of the bigger problems we have to take an idea like yours forward.
Well, let me address that, because you gave.
Let me make one comment. I have to go to a meeting at 12:15, and if I sign off, this whole meeting comes to an end. So can we get just quick responses? And I do think, Michael, that your talk we should revisit this. We should come back during the course of our this season and talk more about this after people have an opportunity to think more and read some of what you've put into the notice of the meeting. But I'm going to have to duck out here in about 5 minutes, and I'm sorry about that. But
Okay, let me just say I've told you about 10% of it.
okay.
When you get into the conversation level and you understand how the system is used, you realize, Mark, those people, that's operating within the current system. They're trying to appeal to the community. If the community's telling them what they're going to do and tell them to jump, they're going to say how high, because they're trying to sell computers to the community. They're trying to sell crypto to the community. Now, if we have 10 million people in E2M, we're going to tell them what they're going to do. They're not going to tell us.
Okay, we can talk more about that, but that's an important distinction. Albert, you're going to have the last comment. Tom, are you?
Well, very quick, but it's actually in response to something that Marv said, not Mike.
Okay.
He said that the main drive is money and growth, etc. When I started my company, and granted it was in a consulting business, not a product, I thought that more money is not the issue, but rather profit. And the way I reasoned it is profit is the difference of two numbers, revenue and expenses. And if these two numbers are very large, you're not going to believe the profit. It could be up and down. You can't control it. And I
Yeah.
learned that from engineering. If you take the difference of two large numbers, you don't know how good is that difference. So I
Yeah.
focused on profit. And actually, for many years, we had a nice life, so to speak, but growth was not an issue. Of course, that it was consulting and people were involved in that very, very tightly as opposed to products. It's quite different. But I had to make that point, which I don't hear anywhere, that people focus on profit, because if you don't control that, you're really in trouble. And sometimes the smaller the totals, the better the profit. Think about that.
I'm sorry, guys. We'll revisit this, I promise, because I think there's a lot more conversation that needs to occur. And this is a topic that really deserves it. So
Look,
thanks,
well,
everyone. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. The conversation will be focused on quantum computers, and I think you'll find it all very interesting. Michael, thank you very much again, and everyone have a great weekend. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.